Welcome back everyone to Under the Plate, and today we're discussing Red 13, one of the best characters in Final Fantasy VII, and what we think his role might be in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. As you may know, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth brought a lot to the table for Red. Obviously, his biggest pieces of development happened in Cosmo Canyon, however, we feel that there's a lot more that is on the table for Red 13, even if it wasn't in the original game. So, Payne, what are we thinking about Red 13 so far, and kind of what are your initial thoughts on his role in Rebirth and setting up for this final title in the Remake trilogy?
So, as we all know, like at the end of Remake, he's really only there for, like a couple chapters. He's a guest party member. But Rebirth is where he really got the chance to shine. He has, like, his main story stuff in Cosmo Canyon, but they really build him up in some pretty interesting ways. Like, I remember, Red 13 got his first, like, voice in Advent Children, so we've always had this idea of him with this, like, deep, gruff voice, but Rebirth adds more depth to his character because, he's a teenager, but he puts on, like, this mask to kind of, like, come off as cool, calm, and collected because he feels that's what he needs to be for the party. So Rebirth has a lot of fun elements that, outside of his serious moments in Cosmo Canyon, he's really a lively party member in a lot of ways. He's very fun, and that grounds him in a bunch of side quests and proto-relic stuff. So for me, like, he has some loose ends to be tied up in the main plot alongside some compilation stuff that Part 3 can definitely tackle. But I'm really excited to see where they go with him for, like, side content, because I feel like that's where he really shone for me in Rebirth.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, and I think that, Rebirth did such a great job, as you said, with the side content and everything that Red 13 had to offer. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff of, how the development team pushed, each character into having their moments with Cloud in the side quest system was wonderful. And Red 13 especially had a lot of really fun quests I think we all really enjoyed. One of my favorites, and, as you said earlier, the Gi, clearly, and in my opinion, probably one of the three most important additions to Rebirth. And Red 13 had an important side quest mission with them where, he promised the Gi that he would, like, free them from their curse of, being, not able to join the live stream and being this, in this endless now, quote unquote. And I think that that's going to be a very key piece of Part 3 that's going to be expanded upon. The Gi, that was just not something that was important as it is now in the original game. But I'm so glad that they added that because, moving from Seto and seeing, Red 13 seeing his father to going to the Gi and kind of learning the origins, perhaps, of, like, the black materia, I think added so much depth to, the thoughts and the meaning behind that, materia. As silly as it sounds, I mean, it really did. And I think with the Gi, it's just a really great example of symbolism and just the thematic meaning behind, Final Fantasy VII as a whole with life and death. And overall, they're gonna want to dive into this. I mean, it wasn't added for no reason. So I'm really curious, like, when in the story are we going to go back and, potentially try to help the Gi? Because for me, it's like, obviously when Meteor gets summoned, it's like, what's that gonna do? Are we just gonna be like, okay, hold up, Meteor in the sky, we gotta go help the Gi? Which I'm sure something like that's going to happen. I mean, that's how it is. That's how it was in the original game, and that's fine.
So will they do that better than FF16?
Hey, as long as the sky isn't, like, the ugliest shade of purple for the, like, half of the game, I'm okay with it. Like, not to touch on FF16, like, I enjoyed that game, but oh my gosh, the Rising Tide expansion, like, the blue skies in there, I was like,
dude,
oh
it was
my
so
gosh.
gorgeous to see that again, truthfully.
100%.
Back on
but
FF7.
Back to FF7.
I do think there could be potential in them running to the Gi, like, when Meteor finally comes to be like, dude, like, guys, is there anything we can do about this? Like, besides trying to, like, wait on Holy? So I'm wondering if, because I think an interesting thing the trilogy's been doing so far is that it kind of grounds things and offers like alternate solutions to stuff sometimes. Like a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the stuff with like Shinra in part 1. Like you really see how they handle things behind the scenes and how that like pushes other things along. So maybe they're like when this happens, they're like, "Oh gosh, we don't really know about Holy or any of this other stuff," and they're just scrambling to try things. And there's a weird part of
Yeah.
me that so remake side quests are just okay, right? Like
Right.
they usually just offer some battles and some little NPC banter, but rebirths are really good. I'm thinking, what
Yeah.
if part
No, I agree.
3 like legitimately just pushes the envelope on the quests, where it's like sometimes you like can't even tell the difference between them and a main quest. So
Right.
I don't want to go this deep where it's like Xenoblade X and you gotta do these missions to do the main mission. I don't think it'll be anything like that. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking there's a lot of potential for like maybe they don't shove like the Gi stuff directly in the main plot and might have like an extensive like side quest thing or like really well done like optional thing where you can go and revisit them and do all this stuff and like learn a lot of stuff on the way.
Yeah. No, I mean that would be wonderful, and I do think that the side content is really going to be expanded for everyone in part 3. Um, and I think that, yeah, that's something that we saw the evolution from remake to rebirth, and I'm sure we'll see it again. But with, I want to go back to the gi, because the
Yeah,
gi
yeah.
to me is just super. We'll make a whole video on this at some point, just because it is just such an interesting topic. But I do think that the gi in Red 13, that's going to be involved, and I do think that like there has to be a conversation had that like, hey, like we understand you guys can't die and you just want to end your existence with the black materia, but like that's not okay to kill everyone else because you can, right? Like I feel like a conversation like that's going to happen. um, but I am curious. I will say, with the Gi, I know we know that the Gi are like they're aliens, right?
Hmm.
That they came after Genova was already dealt with and like in slumber and sleep. So I am really curious to see, maybe if we see more backstory on the Gi than what we initially saw.
It's
Uh,
possible. And
yeah,
I
I
guess
mean
I'm
it's
also
it's interesting.
wondering, like, how can the Gi be set free? Is do you think death or erasure's the only option, or could there be a way to like for them to integrate into the life stream? I just kind of wonder, like,
Yeah,
because like
I
some parts of
I'm
it
not
make me
sure.
think it could just be like part of the original FF7 and still part of the new game's theming is like death. So maybe this really is just like the ultimate end of things. I wonder if it could even like give like reference to things like chaos with like Vincent.
Mm, yeah, that would be interesting. I mean, I know because I think that there are people online that kind of expect that, like, okay, the Gi are going to like join the planet, but like that's just not possible because they weren't born from the planet, right? It's not like the planet's like, no, we don't like you, we don't want you. It's the reality that the Gi were not born from Gaia, so they cannot return to Gaia. So I'm very curious because I don't. I'm just very curious to see how that's handled, and I do think that Red 13 obviously is going to have a key role in that, considering the side quest that he went on with the Gi. And moving kind of past the Gi and potentially stuff like that. Another key part of part 3 that we know is going to happen, or at least we can infer that's going to happen based on the original narrative, is the revisiting of the City of the Ancients. And again, another video that's going to be made. But oh my gosh, like I was so excited for this area. I mean, I remember when I first got there, when I played FF7 years and years ago, and you hear that eerie music and you're exploring this, it's like seashells, it's like, what is going on, right? And you just didn't get any of that exploration in Rebirth, and I was honestly really upset about it.
Yeah,
But
and
we are gonna get
you
to
get
go
some
back.
beautiful
We're gonna get to
screens
go back.
though.
We did. But we are gonna get to go back, and I'm really excited to go back. And if you don't remember in the original game, you go back to the City of the Ancients with Bugenhagen, and there's the key that, turns on the chimes and causes the waterfall to be cast over this ledge. And you go inside and there's a projection of Aerith, and you see that Holy is actually active. And that's where the party finds out that Holy was actually able to be cast before Aerith died. So, that's going to be a very key moment in part 3. Like, I don't imagine that they're going to cut that. I don't know how they would cut that. And again, we've been told they're not cutting any areas. We're going back. I mean, it's a key plot point. So that's going to be a really interesting part with Bugenhagen. And speaking of him, I think that moment of going to the City of the Ancients, that's going to be a moment with Red 13, I think. But again, back to Bugenhagen, he, after that event in the story, actually comes down pretty sick and is, getting close to dying, right? So I think that, remember, in the original game, Bugenhagen kind of sits there, and Red 13, he doesn't want to leave him behind, right? Red 13, that's his family. He doesn't want to leave him behind. But Bugenhagen pushes him and tells him that, he has to go, and he needs to go and experience the planet and share that experience with others. And tells him, of course, he's part of the planet. He's gonna return to the planet, and he's gonna live on, basically. So I'm really curious what the team is gonna do with that, because to me that's a very, very interesting plot point. And when you think about the fact that Red 13, like we said, a lot of his major development already happened, that's just something to me that's I almost wonder if that might be changed, tweaked, or expanded. And something that comes to mind for me is, this is a little extreme, to be fair, but I almost wonder if they actually change it and Bugenhagen actually dies.
So, I think this is actually entirely possible, because I was kind of thinking here, I'd say, when you think of the spirituality and mysticism in Final Fantasy VII, everyone usually turns to Aerith, right? Well, with Aerith,
right,
it makes sense. She's the last ancient and everything. However, now that she's gone, that's kind of Red 13. And I think if Bugenhagen, his paternal figure and basically his grandpa, Red would probably consider him spiritually above himself. So I feel like this would be a weird double passing of the torch, to where it's really it's up to Red to kind of uphold and think these things. And when he too passes on someday, his rich life on Gaia will just enrich more life.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I think Bugenhagen, obviously, he's gonna have a wake up moment that we're going to talk about in a future video with a certain character. But if you'll remember, when the idea and the concept of weapons being brought up, he kind of just shrugged it off and laughed it off in Rebirth, right? And obviously we know that was just simply not the case. So I think for him, he's going to have kind of a realization of wow, the planet actually really is in danger. And the party, of course, like you said, they're going to turn to Bugenhagen as one of the people, the professors of the planet, per se, considering that Aerith is gone, and he's the closest thing they have to someone with a connection to the planet besides Tifa, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to be interesting there. And again, Bugenhagen and Red 13, obviously, that's his grandpa. They have a very close relationship, and so I do think that we're going to see a lot of expansion there. And maybe they do end up killing him off to kind of give Red 13 a big emotional moment in part 3. I mean, but even if they don't kill him off, I still think that Bugenhagen telling Red 13 to go is going to be an incredibly emotional moment regardless, because Red 13 does not want to go. In the original game, he's like, no. He doesn't want to go.
And it's also just Bugenhagen is a human. He's managed to live a long time, but that's also just something Red's gonna have to grapple with. And it's not his
Agreed.
The first terrible grieving he'll have to do, but just really the theme of part 3, as Noah and I've said, is gonna be acceptance. I think Red's gonna have to accept his role like truly. Like we see him really leading up to it in Rebirth. But interesting thing
Mm-hmm.
FF7's been doing for years is that characters think they have an epiphany, then reality kind of sets in there like, oh, I was on the right track, but really there was something missing. And you know, like just look at Advent Children Cloud. Like everyone, back in the day would say, oh, he just became, emo boy Cloud for no reason. And it's like, no,
Oh
it's just everyone
gosh.
remembered original FF7 incorrectly because, all the stuff going on with Cloud. Like, this is just.
Right.
And then, oh, everything's supposed to be hunky dory after the end of FF7. Well, no, he has, like, regrets and concerns. And
Right.
I think that'll be something that's addressed a lot in general in part 3, like just really wrapping things up in some ways and giving like hope for the future, because that's something we we got like barely a snippet of in original FF7 technically. Like yeah, we know
Yeah. I mean,
everything persists, but I
we
think
made that whole video
mhm.
about that. The fact that like the original game had, for the first time in the series, an ambiguous ending. And it wasn't until the compilation that it was like, okay, yes, like the party survived. This is what happened. Like we didn't know that at the time when it released in 1997. People thought, okay, everyone died with the planet Aerith, popping up was like everyone rejoining the planet, or she saved the planet. There, no one really knew. So I do think I agree. Like I think that that's going to be something that's addressed. And Red 13 at the end of the game is grieving Aerith. That everyone's grieving Aerith. And so I think having him combat that, and also, Bugenhagen, health troubles, or even potentially death, I think would be really crazy. And yeah, the guy's old. He's 130. I mean, it's crazy. He's like an ancient fossil. And I mean, and I love the guy. I love his laugh. He's hilarious. But I'm really curious what they do with him in part 3. But back to Red 13, you made a great point there talking about, Advent Children. And something I want to talk about from Advent Children, not specifically, but from the compilation before it, On a Way to a Smile. So, of course, if you're not familiar, On the Way to a Smile is the light novel penned by Kazushige Nojima. And it's a bunch of different episodes that cover all of the main characters of Final Fantasy VII, kind of after the events of the game, and kind of before Advent Children. So one of the things that happens in On a Way to a Smile, and this is in episode Nanaki. So one of the whole chapter just about him, Red 13. So it kind of dives into an interesting relationship that Red 13 ends up having with Vincent. And, as we know, Vincent's going to be a playable character for the first time in part 3. He was introduced at the very end of Rebirth, but really, his development is just not anything really at this point, which is to be expected. So, touching on this stuff and On the Way to a Smile, Red 13 kind of, has this internal struggle realizing that he's an animal, but also, he talks, he's like a human. Like, what is he? He has this just struggle internally with this concept of, what am I? And, another big part of that is the fact that, all his friends are humans. Take Bugenhagen, for example, but they have a limited lifespan. And as we see at the end of FF7, right, 500 years later, like Red 13's like an adult. His species lives for a long time. So the person that he's able to find comfort in this light novel is Vincent. And, one thing that happens is the two of them kind of make this pact that like every year they're going to meet in Midgar, and they're going to be able to talk about like, the journeys that they had, right? And I think that's an amazing relationship. And I think obviously there are a lot of parallels between Vincent being this immortal kind of, quote unquote monster, and Red 13, who also underwent experiments and stuff from Hojo. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see if the development team kind of takes the jump and the leap on establishing that relationship between Vincent and Nanaki right now in part 3. Because I think that it's a really cool dynamic that I would like to see explored. And, there's stuff in the compilation for it. And I think laying the groundwork now and putting much more than was ever in the original game, especially because, Vincent was optional, I think is going to be really great if they can do it.
Yeah, like I mean, the games have already been implementing some like, interesting things from the novels. Like we have Leslie and all that. So,
Kyrie, all these characters
so
that
like
were
I really feel
directly
like
from the novel.
I feel
Yeah.
like that's actually possible, and I think that would be like a cool thing. I mean, in general, we just need Vincent up in this game more, but actually
Right.
establishing, like maybe having, because we saw like Red and Aerith get pretty close over the course of Rebirth because of their like
Mm-hmm.
personal connections to the planet, and they really bonded over that. So I feel
Right.
like there could be a similar thing between Red and Vincent potentially.
I agree. I mean, I feel like there has to be because he lost that person that he was able to confide in with Aerith. And, I definitely think I'm really excited for the Sid Red 13 dynamic.
Maybe this is why Red keeps up his deep voice. He's
Yeah, I
he's
mean,
playing
I,
off
I
Vincent.
think that it's going to be interesting.
But yeah, like just in general, gosh. I wonder I wonder how that will change over the course of part 3. How often Red uses, his more casual voice. Cuz at first it was only something Aerith got to, hear him say.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that it's something that we're gonna, you know, we're gonna see. I even have thought about the fact, like, what if they change his name in the UI to Nanaki, right? I think that's,
Ooh.
I think that's unlikely personally, but I do think it's something that is a possibility that should be talked about at least. Considering that he, introduces, after chapter 10, his voice is revealed and stuff like that, and he uses it, and, people call him Red Nanaki. I don't know. But I do think it would be interesting to see if the development team leans into that. But for the sake of continuity across all three games, I do think he still will be called Red 13.
Yeah, I feel that they'll do that.
And finally, kind of here, wrapping things up, the one other major point that I think of something that could happen in part three, and this is compilation stuff once again, but this is stuff that happens before the main game in Before Crisis. And there is a character that a lot of people don't know about, and a lot of people don't talk about, and a character that we're going to be making a video on. What's that? 3 videos I've talked about we're making in this discussion. But Denna. So Denna is another character that is in Before Crisis, but she's actually the only other living, character in the species that is Red 13. Because, his species isn't really named. They're just like, guardians protecting the planet and stuff like that. But they were actually never named. But in Before Crisis, Denna actually is a character that is a female, the same species as Red 13. And they were actually there. She and Red 13 together were supposed to go to a ritual in Cosmo Canyon. And this happens in Before Crisis. But unfortunately, Red 13 backs out and is all scared and ends up getting caught by the Turks. And that's how he gets captured. And Denna runs out. And really, to cap that off, one of the things that happens is she gets put in this altar. And that's kind of used to explain why she's not in the base game. So, one of the things that I have, it's something that I'm questioning, is Denna going to show up in part 3? And I think if she does, that's going to be tied into potentially a return to Cosmo Canyon to help the Gi and stuff. But, we have to assume that Denna is the character with Red 13, and he's they have the children that we see at the end of the game. So I'm really curious if the development team decides to implement her in part 3, because I think that that's a very critical piece of the compilation that, like, if perhaps we do potentially see that cutscene, even though that's like, the ending we're supposed to defy, quote unquote, like, I do think it would be strange to not expand on who Denna is if we have the opportunity to do that.
Like honestly, I'd bet money that her name shows up either in spoken dialogue or written at bare minimum. Like there has to be some sort of mention because they if they will include Kunzel's name in Remake,
Yes.
there's no way we're not gonna at least hear about Denna, even if we don't see her.
Agreed. And I just think it's something that it makes a lot of sense to me, right? It's something that he has to she not he she Denna has to show up, right? It's Red 13, obviously. I think even like them meeting. So here's the thought, right? Even if she doesn't show up at the beginning of the game, I wonder if like we see in like, potentially like an epilogue style thing, like we see the meeting of them two, or like I guess the re-meeting, considering that they knew each other before Crisis. But I almost wonder. I think we need to see them interact, because I think that's a key part, obviously, of Red 13's life, right? Like he ends up being with her at the end of the game, as far as we can, assume. So I feel that just having that character in existence, like, is enough to make it, an obligation to include her in part 3.
I feel like another potential thing could be like giving like Red 13 like actual flashbacks. Like if we
Mm-hmm.
revisit Cosmo Canyon, like maybe like, oh, like for some reason you go by like the actual, altar room she's locked up in, like, and maybe you just see like the door to it or something, and Red like has some
No, that's a
flashbacks to
great
like when
point.
he gets kidnapped. Or maybe since
That's
we're up
a
on
great
in
point.
Hojo's business more, maybe he's just like, hey guys, this is what happened.
No, I mean, I think that's a great point, because that scene in Before Crisis and like all the ritual stuff, I think would add a ton to like Red 13's background and his character. And I'm honestly, yeah, I'm all for that. Like, I would love to see them kind of do a full legitimate flashback for Red 13 and kind of show him and Denna and like what went down, of how he was scared and backed out because he didn't want to perform the ritual, right? Like, I think that's something that would be really interesting to see depicted, especially with, the Red 13 that we do have now and the expansion of his character we've already got.
Plus, like, it's free marketing. Just you know how they had like Puppy Torgal. Tell me people wouldn't die for just like Red 13 like cub plushes. See,
I think they would. I think Square Enix would run out of inventory very quickly.
instantly. So, just from that angle, I'm gonna say I'm just gonna be a gambler in the back half of this and just say, yeah, I'd bet money on that too, almost.
Yeah, I mean, I just again, I feel it. I feel like it is something that needs to happen, and it's actually interesting. This is another thing with like Red 13 species. In the drafts for the original Final Fantasy VII, there were actually plans for two more members of his species, but they didn't make it in, and they were supposed to be experiments of Hojo.
Huh.
So
Honestly,
I
like,
don't expect them to show up. Because they've already established that he's the only member. Blah blah blah. They're not going to show up at this point. That's cut content forever. But Denna, I think, has a huge case to show up, and I think it would make a lot of sense.
you know what have honestly helped bridge this gap an awful lot to part 3? If they
What's
actually
that?
put Ever Crisis, or I mean, Before Crisis into Ever Crisis.
No, that's not happening.
It's like, come on, guys. We'd have so
We're
much more
definitely
lore.
planning. Yeah, we're definitely planning some stuff for Before Crisis that we feel is very important before Part 3, just because there is so much lore there that, like, I feel like has been kind of referenced or has the potential to be referenced in Part 3, but there's simply, like, no way to play that game. But there are as much as we can, like, there is stuff out there that kind of gives you an idea of everything that happens in it. But unfortunately, like, there's a lot going on with Before Crisis. We'll have stuff soon. I do promise on that front. But with Red 13 wrapping up, Payne, like, what would you say, like, your biggest hope for Red 13 is with Part 3?
I guess I just want him to continue being like just a really fun character that ends up getting like just some more spotlight, because as we've touched upon, like, there's really only a few moments in the original that he kind of has after his time in the limelight in Cosmo Canyon. So I think that's really important. And then they just need to, keep up the momentum by keeping him spectacular in the side content. And they should totally also just let's have a mode where Kate Sith just rides red. Just make that like a tandem unit.
I totally agree. Well, everyone, I think that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Plate. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Be sure to let us know your thoughts on Red 13 and what you're hoping to see from his character in Part 3 down below in the comments. And with that being said, we'll catch you on the next one. See ya.